Hello, today we're going to talk about types of speciation. Here we go. So Darwin didn't really propose a mechanism of speciation in his Origin of the Species. He talked about the fact that it happened. He talked about how the evidence that he had, but he didn't really say how it happened. But speciation depends on two processes. First, isolation of the population, and two, genetic divergence of the population from the rest of the species. So first you have to isolate the population. Okay, if individuals move freely between the population, that will preserve the gene flow, and the populations will remain similar. You have to isolate them so that and stop the gene flow between them with no gene flow. Okay. After isolation, then you need to get genetic divergence. So after the population is isolated, you have genetic drift, natural selection, mutations, things like that, that change the genetics of the population enough so that they become a different species. Okay. Species always requires first isolation followed by the genetic divergence. Okay. All right. And we look at speciation in two broad categories. One is allopatric speciation. Allopatric means different country. Okay. And they isolate species by using a physical barrier. And then sympatric speciation. Sympatric means same country. Sorry about that. And you have isolation without a geographical separation. You usually get temporal separation or some other kind of separation. Okay, so geographic separation can lead to allopatric. Okay, so some kind of impassable physical barrier. Okay, and this occurs when isolated populations diverge genetically because of natural selection, genetic drift. And this is believed to be the most common type of speciation, especially among animals. You get a population that gets separated off somewhere, and then they evolve into a new species. You can have organisms colonize isolated habitats, remote habitats, islands, or reefs far out at sea can lead to separate populations. Geological changes, volcanoes, earthquakes, continental drift, change of course by rivers can also lead to the separation and put physical barriers between populations. So here we go. Here's an example. Some little lizards hopped on a log. It floated over to the other island, and now they're separated by this water. And now they diverge due to genetic drift. And now eventually you get two species of lizards. And this is what happened on Galapagos. Geological changes and climate changes can also divide populations. Rising sea levels, this may be a problem for us very soon, can change a hilltop into an island. New rock from volcanic eruptions, a river that changes course. Okay, and of course, continental drifts have changes. You know, we started off with Pangea, and then everything separated. That's divided populations a lot. Okay, so once the population is isolated, okay, so if the populations become isolated, there's no gene flow between them. Okay, and then if the environments and locations differ, then natural selection may favor different traits in the two different locations. And again, Galapagos was a nice little handy example of kind of all of this happening. Okay. If one of the separated populations is small enough that genetic drift occurs, then the genetic differences may arise relatively quickly. Okay, and this is the most allopatric speciation is the most common source of new species. Okay, so sympatric speciation is a little bit different in that there's not kind of an obvious separation between the populations and different habitats, different environments, that would cause different modes of natural selection. So there are species that remain in the same habitat, so they would have the same selective pressure, yet somehow some reproductive barriers get established in between them. Okay? All right. So two populations may occupy two different habitats. You may have squirrels that live in trees and squirrels that live on the ground, and they just don't happen to mix company. Okay. And then through the act of natural selection, the different members begin to specialize for their habitats. Okay. And eventually they may diverge enough so that they can no longer interbreed. And then you have two species. Okay. Mutations can also lead to sympatric speciation. Okay. New species can arise almost instantaneously if the mutations change the number of chromosomes. Okay. Then when they mate with the original species, something can happen and the hybrid will not be viable because of the difference in chromosome number. Okay. You can also get multiple copies of each chromosome, like the whole genome. This is known as polyploidy, and this primarily happens in plants. It can happen in animals, but it's extremely rare. Okay. So this is also a frequent cause of sympatric speciation. You'll have non-disjunction or not have the correct meiosis in a gamete and get a whole extra set of chromosomes. And again, they can't mate successfully with the normal diploid individuals and then become genetically isolated. Okay. And again, this is much more likely in plants than in animals. Okay. So let's look about how we kind of document the formation of new species. And we use these things called evolutionary trees. We'll have a diagram in a minute, but the history of life is represented by an evolutionary tree, and it's similar to probably what you guys have seen of a family tree. So, you'll have a common ancestor here, and then you go up, and then, you have the siblings, and then those siblings have children, and you get this, the tree of life. Okay. So these evolutionary trees are similar to that, but they relate species through common ancestors. Okay. The base of an evolutionary tree is the earliest organisms, and the ends of the branches represent today. So it's a kind of a timeline as well. Okay. So the mechanisms of speciation and reproductive isolation lead to the forks. So every time we get one of those barriers, those prezygotic barriers or postzygotic barriers, and you get a speciation event, that'll give the tree a fork or a split. Okay. And sometimes these forks or splits happen very quickly, and then we call them adaptive radiation. So you get many new species in a relatively short period of time when it happens very quickly. Okay. And we can see this adaptive radiation where it happens very quickly in new habitats with few competitors. So again, Darwin's finches colonized Galapagos Island, and in a very short period of time, 13 species of finches. One species of finch turned into 13. The cichlid fish colonization in Lake Malawi resulted in over 300 species, again, in a very short period of time. Tarweed plant colonized the Hawaiian Islands, resulting in 30 different species in a short period of time. Okay. Oh, and here we have our tarweed plants, adaptive radiation. And this is what the evolutionary trees look like. So here would be the past. So here would be our common ancestor. Okay. And then each time you get a fork, that is a speciation event. Okay. And so each line represents a new species. And here would be kind of present day species. Okay. If you have an adaptive radiation, if you have a lot of speciation events that are occurring too fast that we can't figure out their order, it just kind of fans out like this. Okay, so here is the speciation events, and then, here are our 4 different species. Okay, that's it.